This is where we take a little bit of a look at different kinds of mixtures. So we know a mixture is not chemically bonded, and so we can separate the pieces back into their parts, but that's not always super easy. So there's different types of mixtures. So suspension is a heterogeneous. Remember, hetero means everything looks different, and that means the things are going to be easily identifiable, and in fact, these separate into layers, and they can be separated by filtering. So the way we're distinguishing these different mixtures is by the size of the particles, and suspensions, they have the largest particles. And then we go to a solution. A solution is a homogeneous mixture, and that means everything looks the same, and these actually have the smallest particles, and the particles that are dissolved in here are way too tiny to see. We can't see them. Sugar water, salt water, things like that, where you take a sip and you know there's something in there, and sugar water is water and sugar, but it doesn't taste, you can't see the sugar. That's a solution, and the particles are so small we can't see them, they don't scatter light, we can't filter these things apart. The only way to get these apart is to separate them by some other physical property like boiling point. If we boil a mixture of sugar water, the water will vaporize before the sugar, and so we can get the water to be driven off and just get the sugar left behind. So filtering doesn't work. Now the last mixture we're going to talk about is somewhere in between, and it's called a colloid. And colloids are fairly important because the particles can be big, but they're not going to settle like in a suspension. And like the cytoplasm in your cells is a colloid. Fog is a colloid. So these things do have particles that can scatter light, but they do have a foggy appearance. But if given time, they're not going to settle into layers. So if we have a mixture, we can actually have all three of these things together, but we go by the largest particles. So if we have a suspension, say like Italian dressing, this is definitely a suspension. You can see there's different layers of stuff in here, there's particles, whatever. We could run this whole suspension through a filter and we could get out the little particles, and so then we'd be left with different liquids, and then we could let these sit and they would separate. We get vinegar and oil, and we could separate these out. But if there's any salt or sugar dissolved in here, and there probably is, we can't get this out by filtering. So we went from a suspension, and we filtered it apart, and we still actually have a suspension, but now we've let it settle and we could siphon off something. And now, after, if we were to filter this out or separate it again, so we just had one thing, then we'd have a solution. So we have, just because something's a suspension doesn't mean everything is suspended. It just means the biggest particles are suspended. There might be some little ones that are actually dissolved in there.